Hey everyone, Dr. Sean Maravici here, and today's the first episode in a new series I'm doing called Breaking the Taboo, where I want to focus more on cannabis education. I want to be breaking that stigma around cannabis as solely a recreational drug and introducing you guys to cannabis as a safe and effective medicinal compound as well. So before I get into today's topic, I just want to remind everyone, if you like these reviews that I do, if you want to know more about cannabis education, please subscribe to my channel. So today's topic is one that I get asked about a lot when it comes to medicinal marijuana, cannabis as a medicine, cannabis as a medicinal compound, and that's, can cannabis be effective for sleep? Because so many of us struggle with sleep issues. So before I really get into that topic, I want to tell you a little bit about my experience with cannabis as a sleep aid. So for many years, probably since back in my high school days, I struggled with insomnia. I struggled with two types of insomnia. So the two main types of insomnia are sleep initiation insomnia, meaning that you have difficulty getting to sleep in the first place. So if you have, if it takes you more than 30 to 45 minutes for more than a few days in a row to fall asleep, that's classified as sleep initiation insomnia. The other really prominent type of insomnia is sleep maintenance insomnia. And that's characterized more by not so much issues falling asleep, but issues with waking up in the middle of the night and having difficulty getting back to sleep. And some people, like myself, struggle with both these things. So for many years, I used a very popular natural compound called melatonin, which worked pretty well for me. You know, I had to adjust the dose over probably around 3-4 years when I was using it regularly, but it seemed to work pretty well until I started developing a very common side effect of melatonin, which is vivid dreams. I would get these night terrors. I wouldn't always remember them, but my wife would tell me that, I wake her up screaming in the middle of the night. So I had to find a different solution. Now, around the same time, I started to really have a lot of patients who were experimenting with cannabis and who were noticing that it was being very helpful for sleep. So I decided to go get my medicinal cannabis for medicinal purposes license. And I got prescribed a cannabis compound, and I started taking it for sleep, and it worked really well for me. So I was instantly converted. Not only did I have sort of an intellectual interest in cannabis at that time, but then, I developed this sort of personal experience with cannabis. So I naturally wanted to help as many people as I possibly could. And so I noticed over the years that I've been recommending cannabis for sleep that it's worked probably more consistently for sleep issues than any other natural compound I've used. So, including melatonin, valerian, passion flower, all those other natural compounds that you hear of typically used for sleep. So that brings me to the next point. Why does cannabis work for sleep? So cannabis does a few different things, specifically when it comes to sleep. So one thing it does is it's an analgesic, so it helps with pain relief. So if people are having chronic pain and that pain is keeping them up at night, cannabis can help on that angle because it helps with the pain. So very simple. Now, another way that cannabis can work is as an anxiolytic, so meaning that it helps calm people down, it helps relieve anxiety. So if someone is having a lot of anxiety around, the day ahead, or they're dealing with some post-traumatic stress disorder, cannabis can be very helpful with the right strain and the right dose, but helping to alleviate that anxiety. So those two are issues that cannabis can help with, that, especially with that sleep initiation. So, the anxiety, the pain, those are typically things that will inhibit people from getting to sleep in the first place. However, what I've found cannabis be most effective for is helping with that sleep maintenance insomnia, where, patients are not really having so much trouble falling asleep, but they're having a lot of trouble staying asleep. They're waking up throughout the night and they're really having a difficulty getting back to sleep. Now, I found cannabis works extremely well for this specific issue. And why that is because cannabis blunts a certain hormone in our body called cortisol. So cortisol, also known as our stress hormone, does many things in our body, but one thing it does is it helps to wake us up. So cortisol is usually highest first thing in the morning when we wake up, and that's what really starts to get the day going for us. And then eventually we have this cortisol curve that dips down, and it's usually or should be our lowest level when we're ready for sleep. Now, the problem is for a lot of people, including myself, I find that if I wake up in the middle of the night, so let's say 2, 3 a.m., I get a cortisol spike. So that cortisol spikes up, it wakes me up, I'm wide awake, and then it takes a long time for our body to have that cortisol level come back down. Sometimes hours. It takes hours for that cortisol to come back down. So what cannabis does is it blunts that spike from ever happening. So it keeps that cortisol from spiking when we wake up in the middle of the night. So we have a much easier time falling back to sleep. Now, that being said, one of the most common side effects from using cannabis as a sleep aid is grogginess or issues with getting going in the morning in the next day. And that's because of that blunting effect on cortisol. So you might not have such a high cortisol spike first thing in the morning. It might take you a little bit more time to get going in the morning. Now, that can be alleviated in many ways. So one of the main controversies surrounding cannabis as a sleep aid is THC's effect on our REM sleep, our rapid eye movement sleep. So it is known that high THC can inhibit REM sleep or decrease the amount of time we spend in REM sleep. REM sleep is important. There's a lot of things that happen in the body during REM sleep. That's when we have our active dreaming. But it also has an effect on our immune system and detoxification of our brain. So REM sleep is important. So one way that we can help alleviate some of that negative effect of THC on REM sleep is by choosing a product that's equally balanced between cannabidiol or CBD and THC. So what CBD does is it alleviates, or it It prevents some of the adverse effects of high THC. At the same time, it helps THC work for more prolonged periods. So it's actually killing two birds with one stone. So you can really, the chances of you having a better sleep and the chances of you having a more successful sleep with cannabis as a sleep aid is by choosing something that's approximately balanced between CBD and THC. So the next area that I want to touch upon with sleep and cannabis is the timing of dosing and dosing in general. So what I prefer to recommend in terms of your method of administration with cannabis is a oil or an edible. Now, this is why. So if we want to be sleeping through the night, which is typically 6 to 8 hours for most people, we want something that's working for the majority of that time. Now, if we're just smoking a joint or using a vaporizer, the peak levels of THC in the blood are only seen for about an hour to an hour and a half, and that's typically how long you feel the effects of inhaled cannabis. Whereas an edible or an oil, it will typically take a lot longer to take effect, so maybe 1 to 2 hours before the effect is noticed, but it lasts for a much longer period of time, so anywhere between 3 and 6 hours. So what we want to do is we want to dose that cannabis oil or edible about an hour before bedtime, allowing the effects to slowly settle in as we're drifting off to sleep, and then having its effect for the 3 to 6 hour length that we're sleeping. So that's what I usually recommend. Now, I will sometimes, and for many people who have both issues, staying asleep and falling asleep, you might want to include on top of your cannabis oil or edible a vaporized form of cannabis to just take right before bed to help calm things down. You know, it's fast acting and it won't last that long. So that's just to help with, you know, getting that sleep initiation, so getting to sleep in the first place. But it's really that oil or edible that's going to really help someone sleep through the night, especially if they're having issues waking up in the middle of the night. So that's dosing and timing. One other thing about dosing, so anyone new to cannabis, or even if you're starting a new product, you want to start low and go slow with your dosing. So I typically recommend, so if you're having an oil product with a dropper, usually one dropper is 1 milliliter. So I usually recommend starting with just 1/4 of a milliliter and taking that for 3 days, the same dose for 3 days. Because sometimes what you get is this sensitization effect where you take it on day 1, no effect, but if you take that same dose on day 2, it starts to have an effect. So with some people, there's this phenomenon where you're upregulating receptors in that sort of first 24 to 48 hour time period. So you don't want to miss that therapeutic dose. So if you take it for 3 days, nothing happens, then you can raise your dose by another 1/4 of a milliliter, you know, going up to 1/2 a milliliter of your oil. So on and so forth. You keep raising the dose after 3 days until you get to that dose, which you notice that your sleep is improved, that you're feeling the effects a little bit from it when you take it, and that you're not getting groggy the next morning. If you're getting a lot of grogginess the next morning, you likely dosed it too high or your timing is off with your cannabis dosing. So that's it for dosing. I believed I covered everything there. Some just general contraindications to cannabis, or more reasons why you should maybe consult with a practitioner before you start cannabis as a medicinal product. Is anyone with a history of psychosis, especially schizophrenia, a history of drug addiction, and a history of cardiovascular disease should definitely consult with a physician before using cannabis. The cardiovascular thing, not too many people think about, and it's because THC in particular can have an effect on heart rhythm and also blood vessel dilation or blood pressure. So that's definitely something you want to ask a physician about before you start using. So that's about it. Now, I'll just tell you sort of as an ending point what I use for sleep. So what I'm using now is, so I use a vaporizer to help, calm me down when I'm ready for sleep, so for that sleep initiation. And I also use an oil to help with the sleep maintenance. Right now I'm trying a few different new vaporizer cartridges for the purpose of reviewing them. I just started using the not the Trailblazer, that's a sativa. The Green Organic Dutchman Unite, which is an indica. Let me talk about that in a sec. So I've only used it for 1 day right now, but it's worked pretty nice. Now the oil I've been using for a long time for my sleep maintenance is the Soleil Balance Oil. And I like this oil for a few reasons. First of all, it's cheap. So if you're using cannabis as a medicine for an ongoing issue, your cost comes into play. So the balance oil is inexpensive, so it lasts a long time, and I could keep purchasing it, no problem. It's also balanced between THC and CBD. And, it's flavorless, which, is not really a thing I care too much about. But for some patients and some people, the taste throws them off. So this one's completely flavorless. So I've been using a combination of those two for a while now. I typically take my oil about an hour before bed, and around an hour before bed as well, I take a few puffs of a vaporizer, and that's been working really well for me for several years. Okay, guys, so that's cannabis and sleep. I hope you got something out of that, and I will be back with some more reviews and some more cannabis education shortly.